So for on the agenda tonight, we will begin with some introductions shortly, and then we will hear from LaQuinn on why we're here tonight, learn a little bit about the plan for initiating carbon sequestration here in California and learn a little bit about what carbon sequestration is. And also specifically what we're tasked with here, which is the plan for governing pore space agreements. So that legal framework. We will get to hear a little bit from all of you about what you understand so far about carbon sequestration, and then we will move into getting some framing around the breakout groups that you will be selecting, and we will send you a link for that. You will select the breakout group that you would like to be in, and hopefully you'll get to talk about the issue that matters most to you and have an opportunity to offer your input and ask whatever questions you have. Then we will return to the full group and have time for public comment, where you will be able to, again, share what's on your mind, what you'd like all of us to know before we leave. So with that, I would like to hand it over to LaQuinn. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorit. Good evening, everyone. As Dorit mentioned, my name is LaQuinn Nguyen. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Energy at California's Natural Resources Agency. So I just want to give some brief, framing context for our meeting tonight. So to start, I'll just talk about our climate goals. I think everybody is experiencing the impacts of climate change. I think we've witnessed it over the past few years. So extreme weather events, such as extreme heat, drought, floods, and wildfires. And really, this has really shown us that we need to do more to address climate change. And so we really need to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions. And these GHG emissions come from sources such as transportation, power plants, and industrial processes. But we don't just need to reduce these GHG emissions, we also need to make sure that what's already in the atmosphere gets removed. We basically need to be removing or producing less or a lesser amount or an equal amount to what we're storing. Sorry, I think I kind of got that mixed up. But so what we're doing is we have a goal of achieving carbon neutrality by 2045. And again, to explain that better is just making sure that we are removing or storing more carbon than we're actually producing. And so last year, the California Air Resources Board, they released a 2022 scoping plan or an update to the scoping plan, and that lays out a roadmap for achieving carbon neutrality and reducing other GHG emissions. So in that, they identify a variety of technologies and strategies that we'll need to use, such as renewable energy and energy efficiency, decarbonizing transportation, and carbon removal was also one of the key strategies. They do set a carbon removal and capture target of 20 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent by 2030 and 100 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent by 2045. So we are going to need both nature-based solutions and mechanical solutions to do this. When I talk about nature-based solutions, that's land management activities such as using forests, open space, and ag land conservation to passively remove carbon from the atmosphere. And then mechanical solutions are engineered solutions such as using a device to remove carbon from the air and storing that carbon underground. So today's meeting is really focused on the sequestration of that carbon. But before we get into that, a little bit more detail on how a mechanical solution would work. You have a device, it removes and captures the carbon from the air, and then it transports it to a reservoir and injects it into the reservoir. The transportation could occur via pipeline, truck, barge, or rail. But again, like that is really, that part of the transportation aspect of this has not been figured out yet. We're still waiting on those details. There's a federal agency that's working on guidelines for transportation. So right now, pipelines are not used in California. And then for injection of carbon, that's going to be injected thousands of feet underground. It will be into a reservoir. It could be a saline reservoir, or it could be like a depleted oil and gas reservoir. And typically there's a caprock or a sort of layer like that's above that reservoir where you're injecting the carbon that prevents the carbon from moving upward and leaking. And in addition, prior to injection, there are usually requirements for identifying and addressing any areas where there's potential intrusions into the ground to make sure that, again, carbon does not leak out of the ground. So again, we're really just focused on the sequestration, but I know we've gotten questions in the past about like how injection works and questions around safety. Those are really important questions that will be answered throughout the development of carbon removal regulations in California, but tonight's focus again is just on that sequestration portion. So I look forward to engaging with all of you throughout this process, and hopefully we'll have a good discussion later today. Thank you so much.
And what we're really here specifically to focus on tonight is talking about the agreements that govern pore space. So, what is pore space agreements? These are agreements that require 2 or more tracts of land overlying the same geologic storage reservoir for purposes of managing, developing, or operating carbon sequestration. So you'll get to hear a little bit more about that when Lisa frames it up for us, but I just want to be clear, that's really the goal of tonight. That's what we're here to get your input on. So what I'd love to do next is learn a little bit about who we're joined by tonight. So on the next slide, what you'll see is a link. So there's a few different ways that you can access this. You can either go to menti.com and put in that code, or you can just copy and paste that link and put it into your browser. And you'll see that the first question invites you to use your mouse and select where in California you are.
We're slowly getting some folks in. So it looks like we have an out-of-state person.
Some folks from out of state. Okay, well, I'm sure more folks will fill it out, but let's go on to the next question here. So here's what we understand so far, your level of understanding on these topics: California's climate goals, carb scoping plan, carbon capture, storage, carbon sequestration. Okay, so we have, some high levels of knowledge in this room. As people come in, maybe it's going up and down. Okay, well, we look forward to sort of checking back towards the end and seeing how it's going. So with that, I'm going to invite Lisa to help us out with some of the framing. That's next. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dorit. Should I wait for the responses on this, or
Well,
is my slide coming?
your slide is coming, but it looks like folks are, yeah.
Great. I'm glad folks are participating.
Okay. Excellent. Let's move into, okay, we have more coming in.
We have more? Hey, look at that.
Okay. So I'll just read out what we have, because it's actually great to see that we have a real diversity of perspectives here in this group. So some folks wrote, goal is that we successfully capture and store carbon and meet our climate goals. And then someone else wrote, I would like to see that carbon sequestration is not implemented unless it's proven effective, which hasn't happened. So we have a mixture of, expressions here. And someone else wrote that California be the leading the world in CCS implementation. And then coming to an agreement without pushback. So, we allow CCS to happen so that we can clean the air. All right, so let's move into the next one. I can see in the chat, Philip, you've requested the Menti screen. The link is in the chat. So if you click on that link, you should be able to access it, and we'll come back to. Okay, so before I hand it over to you, Lisa, actually, I'm just going to do a quick walkthrough of each of these breakouts so that folks can get a sense of where we're going. So in a moment, as Lisa is walking through context for each of the breakouts that you see up on the screen, you will also see a link that will be pasted in the chat. And you can click on that link at any point while Lisa is talking and select the breakout room that you want to be in. So I'll, again, remind you to do that towards the end, and you'll have 10 minutes, 15 minutes to select the breakout group that you want to select. So these are the options. There's compensation is one. So looking at, what should the method of compensation be? How should rights holders who don't participate in the agreements be compensated? Public process, what should the public process look like to promote transparency and fairness? Which agency should be involved in reviewing this? Liability and financial assurance, who should bear the liability? Site integrity and monitoring. What if the CO2 migrates? How can we be sure that these sites are being monitored appropriately? Unitization threshold. Is 75% of effective interest appropriate? Should it be higher? Should it be lower? What is that percentage? And then how can community central needs be taken into account in all of these different categories? So those are the topics. And we will also have topics for Spanish speakers as well. So if you're a Spanish speaker, you can select any of these topics as well in Spanish, and you'll be placed in the appropriate group. Thanks so much. So Lisa, I'm going to hand it over to you to offer us some framing now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dorit. So I'm Lisa Halko. I'm Chief Counsel of the Department of Conservation, and the Department of Conservation is assisting CNRA, the California Natural Resources Agency, with preparing the framework for carbon capture and sequestration. And the legislature in SB905 has assigned the Secretary of Natural Resources to develop this framework for pore space agreements. And the first question that we want to know is how should the landowners who own the pore space, and by pore space I mean the porous rock underneath the cap rock into which the carbon dioxide would be injected. If you look at this picture, you can see down at the bottom there's a little call out of the cap rock, which is indicated with the black line. That is non-permeable, non-porous rock that would keep injected CO2 from migrating into higher areas of the geological structures. For example, where there might be drinking water, where there might be geothermal energy. There are other things going on up above the layer where the rock that has pore space in it will be. And the pore space is microscopic. It's very small. It's the spaces in between tiny bits of rock where there might have been oil before that's been taken out, or it might just be porous and able to accept injections of carbon dioxide. So the question is, we know, because the legislature has explained, and it's fairly well accepted in American law, that the owner of the pore space is the person who owns the surface. The surface landowner is going to be is in possession of this pore space, and somebody else is going to be using it. So what's a fair compensation? Some people have suggested that the government should be setting minimum pricing. Some people have suggested that the government should require certain kinds of compensation, one-time purchases versus ongoing payments out of revenue. And some people have advised that in their view, the key thing is to have a fair bargaining process, and that as long as the process of bargaining over this is fair, then the commercial contract should be fair and should have a fair compensation that comes out of it. Next slide. Then we also want to talk about the public process for determining the fairness of the compensation and the other things about the pore space agreement. So in some states, only the landowner and the prospective operator are involved in that process. In other states, the landowner who owns the pore space and the surface, and the operator, and all of the folks who own mineral rights in the earth in between are all part of the process. As far as I know, there is no current process that requires notice to residents in the area, as opposed to the owners of the land and the person who would be injecting the CO2. So I think that's something that we definitely want to hear about. What should that process look like? who should participate in it, and what would be the criteria for an agency that's going to be approving or disapproving those pore space agreements. What should be the criteria that the public process uses to make sure that compensation is fair? Next slide. Now, liability and financial assurance. So this is an activity, like many activities, where things can happen. There might be corrective action that is needed in the case of pressure causing effects underground that were unanticipated. There certainly is going to be a need to plug up those wells and remediate the site after the project is finished. There's going to be a lot of monitoring for the safety and the permanent sequestration of the site that could go on for decades and decades. And there could be emergency responses in the event of an accident. So who should be liable for that? And I believe that most of the comments we've received have said that the landowner should not be liable. The operator should be required to pay all those costs. But a law that says who's liable is really only as good as the financial assurance to back it up. That is to say, we want to make sure that the money is there when it's needed, and it's not liability that's assigned to what may turn out to be an undercapitalized or a bankrupt corporation. They have to show that they have the ability to pay those costs. And what form should that take? Some of the forms that might be allowed would be bonds, letters of credit, insurance, third-party insurance, and and at least some jurisdictions allow for self-insurance, that is a corporate setting aside of the funds that are needed. So that those questions of liability and financial assurance are the subject of this breakout group. Next slide. Site integrity and characterization. So these are some images of monitoring that's been done in Norway in a carbon sequestration project that's a few decades old. And we are able to see how the pore space is taking up the carbon dioxide. There's enough experience with this monitoring that we know that ordinarily there's a good ability to predict where the CO2 is going to go underground within that pore space reservoir. And sometimes it might be that it doesn't, right? That there's some geologic formation that for one reason or another causes it to go outside of the predicted area of review. And then the question is, if that happens, how does the person who owns that pore space be compensated? How is the agreement opened up, as it were, to allow for that? Next slide. And finally, I guess it's not final, but then the next question is the unitization threshold. You've heard us talk about this number, 75%. The legislature directed that the framework has to require that the folks who want to do the operation have the rights to at least 75% of the pore space that they're going to access. And then one might ask, well, what's the other 25%? Well, the other 25% might be folks who cannot be identified for one reason or another. For example, if over several generations there have been folks who've died without a will, it might have been sprinkled up into a whole lot of different heirs who are hard to locate. Or it's possible that perhaps a competitor of the operator bought some pore space or some land there solely to prevent from somebody else from using the reservoir. Or there might be any number of other reasons why it's in everyone's interest to say, yes, this agreement can go forward, even though you don't have the consent of 100%. If we're going to allow for that, how should that happen? And what is the appropriate threshold? Is 75% reasonable? Should it be higher? Should it be lower? There are states where it's as low as 60%, and there are states where it's as high as 80%. We're also aware that in some jurisdictions, there is no unitization yet, and then they need to figure it all out entirely by consent. So those questions are the subject of this breakout group. Finally, community needs. As I mentioned before, the land isn't just owners and operators. There are folks who live there. There are communities who are nearby who might be affected. What do the communities need to feel that carbon dioxide sequestration is beneficial for them and for their community? What do folks need to feel safe with that, with knowing that that's going on? Those are going to be the topics of the community needs breakout group.
Thanks so much, Lisa.
Thank
So
you.
we're going to return to actually our breakout slide that has the full list of breakout topics. And I want everyone to take a look at this. And right now, click on the link in the chat if you haven't yet. And please take the time to select the topics that you're most interested in talking about. And I'll give you some time to do that right now. I'm also, yeah, I'll wait. I'll just give a few moments right now for you to do that. So take your time, choose your topics. Thank you. Okay, so we can now go into the instruction slide. So if you have not selected one, we will just put you in a topic. And then if when you get there, you'd like to switch to something else, that's completely fine. Your facilitator will give you instructions on how to do that. So a couple quick guidelines for how these breakout groups will go before I give the instructions. It's so important to us that we understand what matters most to you. And our hope actually is that you'll be in breakout groups with people who are coming from different perspectives from the ones that you hold. Maybe they have different interests, different backgrounds, or different areas of expertise, and you can learn from each other. We're all coming here with different degrees of knowledge. Some of us might be coming with a lot of questions. Maybe there's a lot we want to learn. Maybe there's a lot that we don't know. Maybe others of us have been working on this for years and we have a lot of information that we're eager to share. And that's great. So the hope is that you'll listen to each other and that even folks who maybe don't have that much information may still feel really strongly about some of these issues, and we want your voices here as well. The goal really is to listen to one another and to seek to understand one another. So our hope is that we can engage very respectfully in these conversations. Please share airtime. Remember that everyone came with a desire to participate. No one wants to be lectured to by other people in the group. So really be conscientious about how much everyone in the group is talking. And last, but definitely not least, please allow your facilitator to facilitate. There will be a sort of structured portion at the beginning of your breakout group. Your facilitator will at some point let you know when it's time to wrap up and move on to the next person during that structured part before the open conversation. And we ask that you respond to that when they raise their hand, that you wrap up your sentence so that we can move on to the next and that we can hear from everybody in the group. So the next slide, please. So these are the prompts that you'll be discussing in your breakout group. And when you get there, you'll have an opportunity to reflect on them. We'll be inviting you to think about what idea that you've heard in regards to the topic you chose is most interesting to you. What do you think is the most compelling and promising? What do you think the rest of us need to know that we might not already understand about the topic? And then last, what questions do you hold that haven't been answered still? What do you want to understand better? What questions do you want to ask of the group? And if your facilitator can't answer, we might be able to answer it by sending our very own Lisa Halco into your group to answer those questions. And the idea also is that any questions that remain unanswered at the end of this meeting, we will be posting answers to on the website. So hopefully all answers will be received at some point in the near future. So with that, I am going to move us into the breakout rooms. So stay tuned. You should have an invitation shortly up on your screen to join a breakout group. Hey, welcome back, everyone. So we're going to check in and again, use this fun tool, Mentimeter, to learn a little bit about what you're taking away. So if you could either, go to menti.com and enter the code on the screen, or feel free to use the link, and it's also in the chat, and you can click on that and you'll see there's a question waiting for you to answer, and Steph will show the answers on their screen now. So the question is, what was something that you learned tonight? And we are waiting to see responses. I know that many of you had an opportunity to sort of share your takeaway in your small group, but I know as a full group, we'd be really interested in hearing what that was. So I'll also, call on some folks, but love to see it in writing as well. So one thing that was learned is that there is more enthusiasm for this effort than I imagined. So that's a great learning. Another is people are still scared and want to know more about carbon sequestration. And then other perspectives were learned, and then confirmation that carbon sequestration is a false solution. So that's one takeaway here, and that's important. I appreciate you raising your voice. I know that there are real differences in the room and different relationships to this tool. Some folks are really enthusiastic about it and others not at all. So carbon dioxide storage is very complex and uncertain was another takeaway. Another, I was surprised to learn there is an interest in 100% unitization. And we'll see as others are coming in. Does anyone?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Krishna here. I've been seeing this CCS projects actually for last 10, 15 years when Barack Obama was the president, and he put about $1 billion project, coal-fired power plant, when that's what they were trying to do. And the people, they spent all the money, and finally they came to the conclusion that this is not going to work so easily. So it's a very complex subject. You can do all these studies and everything. Probably the money spent on those things may not be that useful. You may do some small CCS projects, but it's a good thing to do it. But I'm not sure how far it will go.
Okay, so sounds like some real skepticism around
Right.
actually
Yeah.
how effective it will be. Can this really be done?
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Krishna, for weighing in here. And I can also see some comments in the chat coming in also about community needs not being truly addressed, that some folks feel that this is a box that's being checked. We appreciate you sharing that and being here. I think it's important for folks to hear that. And I want to invite people to move on to the next question in the Mentimeter. You can see hopefully coming up on your screen. So what else do you want to learn about? So we'll wait for those responses to come in now. And again, feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to share verbally.
I had a bit of a question, and I was just wondering, in regards to looking into new technologies to mitigate the impacts from climate change and these efforts to reduce carbon, CO2, why the potential of soil carbon sequestration hasn't been included, or why there hasn't been an investment into technologists in regards to looking into soil, seeing that soil also has the potential to absorb a lot of carbon as well, and why have no efforts gone in that direction when it would be less intrusive, less risky?
Okay, thanks so much for that question. So the question basically being, why have some of these other strategies not been utilized, or even have they been utilized? Maybe that's an open question. Maybe they are being utilized. I don't know if either Lisa or if LaQuinn, if you want to weigh in on it, also might not be something that we're equipped to answer here in the space, but we can take a bunch of questions now and then come to them later. Okay, so maybe let's do it that way. So we'll take that one. Some other questions. I want to understand more community concerns and fears. I want to understand more about the permitting process and how to stop these projects. What research is being done to verify that the storage locations chosen are suitable for uses on century timescales? Okay, so lots of big questions here. And again, we might not be able to answer all of it tonight, but because really I know the focus for tonight is on pore space agreements, of course. That said, it's possible that some might be able to be answered. So I want to open it up to Lisa and LaQuinn if either of you want to try to see if you can take a stab at any of those questions here. Thanks.
Thanks, Joy. I can try a couple of these. In terms of using soil for carbon sequestration, that is something that we're also trying to utilize. So we would consider that the use of like natural and working lands for sequestration. I do have a colleague who is working on that, and we are trying to encourage those projects. And there's also the Energy Commission. They are doing research and development, and so they are open to, doing research and development on using soils for carbon sequestration. But we're trying to use every tool that we have to sequester carbon. So it's not just, these mechanical carbon or engineered carbon methods that we're talking about. We are trying to use the natural and working lands or using soil. One of the issues with using soil to sequester carbon is it's a slower process. So it's a longer term solution, but we also need something in the near term to reduce our carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And, just a reminder, we are still pursuing things such as using solar, wind, offshore wind, geothermal, or basically renewable energy as well to help limit our emissions. And then we are, taking steps in trying to decarbonize all sectors to also reduce our emissions as well. So not just looking at engineered solutions like carbon capture sequestration. Carbon capture sequestration is just one of the solutions. And then the other question, a big one that I think is, how to participate in the process. So also want to remind people that this framework for governing agreements that we're talking about, this is not the actual project itself. The actual project itself and the project moving forward or getting permitted, that's a separate process. The California Air Resources Board, they are coming up with a program for carbon capture sequestration projects where we'll look at, how the permit or the approval process for projects. So that is definitely a place for communities to engage or for the public to engage. Any stakeholder can engage, really. I believe they're going to kick their process off in 2024. So I would just be on the lookout for updates from the California Air Resources Board. The US EPA Region 9, they also have a permitting role for these projects. And so you can also go to the US EPA website and look at the projects that are posted there, and they'll have information on how you can engage or provide comments to the US EPA Region 9. So that's another good way to engage on these projects. And then also through the local government. Local government, they also play a role in permitting these projects. And so every local government should have some sort of, public process through which you can engage as well.
Thanks, LaQuinn. And I'm seeing also a question related to what you were discussing earlier about those other strategies aside from carbon sequestration and whether those are also being subsidized. I don't know if you know the answer to that question.
Wait, can you say that again? If the other strategies are being subsidized?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it depends. I mean, yes, we are incentivizing other solutions as well. So for example, solar in the beginning, it did receive subsidies. So there's still, there still are incentives for installing solar on your rooftop, for example. That was an example of subsidization or incentives. In terms of other technologies, there are tax credits that they can get as well. I mean, I don't know all the specific ways that we're subsidizing these technologies, but we are subsidizing and trying to encourage development of these other technologies like solar, wind, offshore wind. A lot of it might not be through a straight, subsidy or money, but there's often tax credits at both the state and the federal level. And then there's also other ways that we'll try and encourage these other technologies. So for example, offering, certainty around the permitting process and making sure a permitting process is efficient. So making sure they get a decision or a movement within a certain amount of time.
Great. Thanks so much. I see also coming new questions around the legal theory that would permit confiscating property to make a 100% unit other than the existing instrument of eminent domain, something that we've heard about a lot in prior sessions. Another question is, if pore space is below a cap, can the CO2 move sideways into or over cracks? So questions about actually sort of the mechanisms figuring out how you can tell where the plume might migrate to. And then also this question around unitization in and of itself, sort of how that can be rationalized, kind of bringing people into a unit legally. So I don't know if there's anything that you want to add to anything that's on the screen or anything else that's been asked. Lisa, yeah.
Sure, I'm glad to speak to that. I'm assuming that the question about making a 100% unit has to do with situations where some of the landowners or mineral interest holders don't consent, and the unitization plan still allows their property to be used. And there is a prohibition on uncompensated takings, and that's one of the reasons that the compensation is so important. The legal theory is that there is a robust administrative process that will allow the state to see whether the compensation is fair. And as I said, one of the questions about the compensation being fair is that the negotiation strategies are fair, that people have full and informed consent. And if it's necessary, then if it is necessary, and if the committee, the entity that reviews these decides that it is fair, then the legal theory is that since there is fair compensation, there's not an uncompensated taking. And eminent domain is one of the ways that that we use the courts to determine the fair compensation, but it's not necessarily a judicial process. It can also be an administrative process, and that's the process that we would be using if there is a unitization threshold less than 100%. Then in terms of the pore space below a cap, I'm not a geologist, but I've been talking to a lot of geologists, and again here the question about there is a requirement of permanence, that is to say the carbon's going to go in there and it's going to stay in there. And one of the things that US EPA looks at when they're doing Class 6 permitting, and that I'm sure that insofar as CARB has sets up a separate program for permitting that they will also do, is to be very careful about the geology to make sure that there are no cracks or faults, for example, that could lead to an escape. The reservoirs are very, very large. The particular area that accepts the carbon dioxide may be smaller than that. So the idea is that if there are, say, faults that could create conduits, that they are carefully excluded from the area of review. So there is a good deal of geologic knowledge about what works here, and that would always be applied in the application process for a project.
Thanks so much, Lisa. So we're going to move now into the final section on public comment. So if any of you need to leave early, you can also see that the next steps are up on the screen, and towards the end, I'll turn it over to LaQuinn and she'll walk us through that in more detail. But before we get there, I'd like to open up the floor to public comment. So if there's something that you would like to say to the group or a question that you would like to pose, I'd invite you to please either come off, show your be on video and then raise your hand and I'll call on you the old fashioned way. Or if you prefer to stay off video, you can raise your hand with the Zoom icon. So either way, and then I will call on you. You're also welcome, of course, to make your comments in the chat. That's another alternative. And I'll do my best to read those out as well. So I can see that Philip has placed a comment in the chat. He writes, the oil industry and landowners have made many thousands of unitization agreements over the last century, or unionization agreements. There is a large body of case and statutory laws that govern the equitable formation operation of unitized land. Okay, so maybe it meant unitized. Thank you. Yes, Stephen.
Yeah. Hi, Stephen Rosenblum. I live in Palo Alto. We're seeing the permitting applications for a carbon dioxide storage well in the Suisun Marsh area in the Sacramento Delta. It's called Montezuma. And I don't know where the state is on allowing these kinds of projects to move forward. They're applying for a Class 6 well permit with the EPA. And I don't know if it doesn't sound to me like the SB905 process is far enough along yet to make decisions about wells like this. Is this something that you're aware of?
Sure, I can speak to that. The permitting it's a federal permit. So the process that we're talking about tonight is the question of how to amalgamate the property rights necessary to access the pore space that's going to be used. And that's a state law phenomenon of property rights. In contrast, the permitting for the project is US EPA Region 9. And I'm happy to put into the chat a link to the site where folks can see all of the applications for Class 6 permits in California. Again, we don't know what CARB might be developing, but there is a robust federal permitting process. It doesn't have all of the same criteria for some of the elements as CARB's low carbon fuel standard, but I believe that under 905, CARB will be expanding its regulations to cover all the projects in California. Meanwhile, it is the federal government that does the Class 6 permitting.
Thank you, Lisa. Any other questions or comments, rather? I can see there's a question. Is the draft translated into any other languages other than English? Is one question here. I don't know if either. And by draft, I'm curious, do you mean the SB 905? Maybe Bianca, you could come off mute and share a little bit more about your question with us, just so that we understand it.
Yeah, sorry, I just read something about a draft. I don't know where I read that. Basically, anything that you're asking public comments about need to be translated if you want to get people who speak anything other than English.
Thank you. Yes, so Lisa, I don't know if you want to field that one, or LaQuinn.
Yes, we have planned for translation services for the documents that will be circulating for public comment. Thank you so much for the question. It's really important.
Thank you. John, yes.
Just to follow up to Lisa's very clear explanation of the legal theory, and thank you for that. Just a question, why would anyone assume that an administrator would be able to render a more fair and faster judgment than a court? And then I have a follow-up after that.
Okay, thanks, John.
Oh, well, let me just posit my follow-up then. If the first one wasn't going to be answered, I'm not a journalist. Gosh, what am I doing? So the follow-up is, see if I can remember it accurately, is if the administrator is more likely to be subject to a legal proceeding if the receiver of the judgment doesn't agree that it's fair, and you're going to possibly end up in a court proceeding anyway. In the interest of expediting the development of CCS in our state, it seems to me like eminent domain may be a faster and fairer solution.
Right, and I know in previous meetings you've suggested that as well, that eminent domain be used rather than this unitization approach. And we've definitely recorded that and taken note of it. I'm wondering, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, Lisa, on that note, or LaQuinn.
You know, what we really are working on very hard is identifying options, and certainly the option of using only judicial means to accomplish this is one of the options, and eminent domain would be one. I don't think that that's what the legislature was asking us to do. So the task that I see us as having is the question of what would be a robust enough administrative proceeding that we would have the information that's needed to make those determinations, and then create an administrative record that would be available to any judge who were to hear it.
That's very clear. Thank you.
Thanks. And Bianca, yes, I did just put into the chat the www.epa.gov, and it's not a public review site, but it is one that allows people to know what the applications are. And it also will tell you the county, and it tends to be the county that does the initial land use permitting.
Great. Thanks so much, Lisa. Really helpful. Any other questions or comments for this time? Feel free to just raise your hand the old-fashioned way or with the icon.
I was just wondering if I could get a little bit more elaboration on the engagement of community members in regards to individual projects. Is there like a consensus around frontline engagement, or does each project or each county decide how communities get engaged? Or what does that look like, or who decides upon who and how that outreach gets done?
Great. Thanks, Laura. So, LaQuinn, yes.
So there's a couple ways that community engagement should take place and could take place, Laura. So again, there's a couple different permitting venues or things. So, and it all depends on the project, right? So there could be different permits associated with the project. I'll just say something like the key ones that we know about for sure. So CARB has a role, California Air Resources Board or the local air district, as well as US EPA Region 9. Both of those have requirements for engaging or with the public. So again, some sort of public outreach and engagement process, and then local governments. I don't want to speak for every local government because I don't know how they'll handle this, but from some of the local governments that we talk to, a lot of them are treating these like projects. And when I say projects, that means that they're going through an environmental review process, going through the, being subjected to the California Environmental Quality Act, which does require that they do some sort of public outreach and engagement around the project. And then also talking to developers. We haven't talked to every single developer that's out there, but there have been quite a few that we've talked to, and many of them have told us that they plan to do or are doing community outreach and engagement. And I know in the case of at least one developer, I have seen that happen where they are actually going out to communities, walking the communities, passing out flyers and trying to do community meetings.
Great.
And,
thank you, Gwen. Oh, yes. Were you going to add something?
Sorry, I would just want to add to and the expectation from the state is that there is a strong element of community engagement or outreach with these projects. That's our expectation.
There's another question that's in the chat that's connected to fair compensation for in this unitization process or eminent domain process for the landowner who did not negotiate, and some of the options that are being considered for how to determine what fair compensation would look like. I'm wondering if, I know that part of the process here is actually determining that, and that's a lot of the reason we're here is that we've been requesting input, and we've been having a series of meetings with various people and gotten a lot of input so far. So I know that there has been a lot of live discussion on this. I wonder if either Lisa or LaQuinn, you'd want to speak to some of what we've been hearing in any terms.
I think maybe some of the questions about eminent domain are assuming that that's the process that will be used, and I just want to say that that decision hasn't been made, and that before it is made, there is going to be a robust opportunity for public comment on the draft framework, which will be available in the necessary languages. I don't know if that's helpful. I hope.
Yeah, well, and I think the question was going more towards compensation, but I don't know if that was only in the case of eminent domain, or if that question is broader, thinking about even in unitization, how would you determine fair compensation for those individuals? Yeah,
I'm happy to go on about that a little, but I'm a little concerned that there are other hands up, and I would hate to spend a whole lot of time on responses to one comment before we've heard from others, if that's okay.
Yeah, so we will return to that question if there's time to think about some of what we've thought through for that. So Caroline.
Yes, thank you. I just had a thought about kind of community engagement around, particularly like institutionalizing the requirement around community engagement by maybe as part of the framework when looking at like liability and financial assurances, creating some type of mechanism for community benefits agreements and things like that. that may be building off some of like the local land use authorities of the county, so that there's some minimum thresholds, because there's a lot of power dynamics in negotiating these agreements, particularly between under-resourced communities and the developers of these projects. So some type of mechanism within the framework around community benefits and things like that could be a way of making sure engagement is happening in a meaningful way, and the communities are deciding for themselves how they can ensure that the project is working for them.
Thanks. I don't know, Lisa or LaQuinn, if you'd like to speak a little bit to sort of some of what's being considered in terms of community needs, or just to affirm that that's being looked at. Yes, LaQuinn.
Yeah, so appreciate the comment, Caroline. And we've heard that from a couple other stakeholders as well, the need for community benefit agreements. They've also actually, or from community members, have also heard that from developers, that their openness to doing community benefit agreements or some sort of community fund. And then also have heard that from some of the local governments as well. And I do want to also just share that something that we heard in another meeting, which I do want to make sure that like it's very clear, that there's a difference between mitigation and community benefits. So that is understood. We definitely, understand that. Some of the things that we're thinking about as we think about community needs is, other options that we think about besides community benefit agreements is, the things that address some of the community concerns that we've had. So such as like the monitoring agreements. I know that a lot of monitoring is required by some of the required permits, but thinking about how to make sure that there's the level of monitoring that communities would desire, as well as having access to those results, is something that we've heard. We've also been thinking about, in terms of long-term liability for these sites. At some point, these reservoirs will be full, and what happens? Should there be some sort of like insurance fund that would basically cover, long-term maintenance of these sites, or should there be another fund that's created to address, first responder needs or emergency response needs? And we're talking about like fire department, police department. What are some of their needs so they can make sure that they're equipped to really respond to any situations that may arise with some of these projects? But those are some of the other things that we have heard as well.
Thanks, LaQuinn. And I want to point everyone's attention to the chat, because we've had some posted links. I know that some questions came up in one of the breakout groups to learn more about the Norway site study, where carbon sequestration is being undertaken there, and sort of some of the learnings that are coming out from that project. So the links there in the chat, and then also a list of some of these projects, the US EPA projects, and their statuses in the Class 6 current application process that's going on right now. So that's a way to learn a little bit more about all of this. I think we have time for another couple comments or questions if anyone is sitting with anything else before we begin to wrap up and talk about next steps. Anyone, especially if we haven't heard from you yet, if there's anything you'd like to say or ask about. Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your engagement and your questions and your comments. And I want to turn it over to LaQuinn to talk to us a little bit about the next steps. Stephanie, if you can go back to the previous slide. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dory. So we're at basically, I think, the second point in from the left, November 2nd. We're doing our virtual regional meeting. So at this point now, we've done a couple in-person meetings, as well as met with some stakeholders. So what we're planning on doing is over the next month or so, maybe a little bit longer, taking all of the input that we've heard, all the comments that we've received, really thinking through those and coming up with a draft framework. There is still time after today to continue to provide feedback to us. Please, we welcome you submitting comments. Feel free to email us comments, send us comments through the mail, or even call us. But again, anything that you may have not shared that you want to share, or questions that you may come up with later on, please feel free to share that with us. So again, we'll be considering everything that we've learned, tonight and in previous meetings to consider for incorporation into this framework. We hope to put out this draft framework in December of this year. As Lisa mentioned, it will be posted in another language, not just English. Once we do get it out, it will be posted for a 90-day public comment period. So again, you'll have opportunity to read through that document and then provide comments, suggestions in response to that document. So if we put this out sometime in December, then we would anticipate a public comment period ending around end of March of 2024. And after that, we'll take the next couple months to think through the comments that we received, make additional edits, adjustments to that draft framework, and then hopefully put out a final framework end of June 2024.
Thanks so much, LaQuinn, for that. And with that, I want to thank you all again for coming tonight. And again, please feel free to continue to email with comments and questions. And we look forward to continuing to engage with you in this process. And I hope that all of you have a good evening and rest of your week. Thanks so much.